Okay, so we're going to get started with history today. We've been talking about which empires? Stevie, name one.
The Dutch.
Dutch. Ania? Say a different one. Spanish. One more. Steven?
Portuguese.
No, not really. They got mentioned, but not really. Zane?
French, yeah.
The French, right. The Dutch, the French, and the Spanish. Lilybug, we're going to have to be more quiet. Greg, we're going to have to be more quiet. We're doing history. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, really, when we think about the founding of the United States and the beginning of the United States as a country, we tend to think of England as the progenitor or the source of the United States. And why do you think that's the case? Why do people typically think of England as the source of the United States?
Because they founded it, and that's who we rebelled
The
from.
English did not found the United States.
That's who we rebelled from.
There were colonists who rebelled from England, but there were also colonists who rebelled from Spain. Stevie?
Because they were the ones to live in, they were the ones who were living at the time in the area where our country began.
The area, right? The English colonies are the colonies that became the United States. That's why we tend to think of our nation as coming from England. But there is territory that was controlled by Spanish that is part of the United States. There is territory that was controlled by the French Empire that is part of the United States. There is territory that was controlled by the Dutch Empire that is part of the United States. So all of these different empires have influenced the United States. And so when you look back and you think about the United States as a whole, as the whole of our history, you can't think of it as just an offshoot of purely English history. Right? England is going to have a profound impact upon the United States, the formation of the country, and where we are today. But they're not the only ones who impacted it. All right? So let's look very quickly at a timeline. This isn't where we're going to stop. We're going to keep moving forward. But in 1215, the Magna Carta is signed by John. Why is that a big deal? Why is the Magna Carta a big deal? What does Magna Carta mean?
It means
Great charter. It's a great agreement between the barons and the king, right? Between the nobles and the king, taking what away from the king?
lots of power.
Absolute authority. Stephen?
I was just going to say, it basically makes the king slightly less powerful, so he can't do some things without his nobles' permission.
It gave the nobles rights, and it was a written law. Why is having a written law important? People know what the law is, right? That's important. Why else is a written law important?
Because then you can just rely on the noble who happens to tell you, this is the law.
Right. The personal whims of individuals are lessened. Steve?
Because then it can be printed and everyone can read it.
People who can read. But there is a record of the law. Otherwise, however the king feels that day is the law. If the king feels like broccoli should be illegal today, then broccoli is illegal. If tomorrow the king likes broccoli again, now broccoli is not illegal anymore. And it just, whatever the king feels is, or whatever the ruler feels, is the law of the land. And so a written law, the Magna Carta, kind of charts out what is going on. And historically speaking, we draw our history directly from the Magna Carta, the idea of having a written charter, a written constitution that founds and ordains the powers of the government.
They were the ones who invented constitutions.
No, they're not the first ones to write down laws. The Romans had written laws. Hammurabi, years ago, and around the time of Moses, had written laws. The law that Moses delivers to Israel is written.
Constitution.
No, it's just that from England, this is the English history of written laws. So 1584, there's going to be a book written. You don't need to know who wrote it, but there's a book written called A Discourse on Western Planting. Why would that be important? Think, why would a book about gardening about planting, not gardening like, oh, aren't my flowers pretty, but like, here's how I grow food. Why would that be important, Ania? If you're going to send people over on boats, what do they need to know how to do, Jaden?
Garden.
They need to know how to grow food. Steve?
I was going to say it's going to basically tell unexperienced people how growing food in the western area works best.
Yeah, but Western planting isn't just, right. It's going to tell people, this discourse on planting is going to tell people how to grow food over here. Right? So that's important. Because now people are going to be coming over here, they have to know how to grow food or they're going to starve to death. So in 1585, the first English colony, really a real attempt at a colony, comes over in Roanoke. 1607 is Jamestown. 1619, the first African slaves will arrive in Virginia in the English colonies. Have African slaves been over in the New World already? Yes. In the West Indies and in the Caribbean islands, there have been lots of African slaves. There have been African slaves brought into the Spanish colonies all over throughout the Spanish Empire because they couldn't enslave who?
Indians.
The Indians, right? So the first African slaves arrived in the English colonies in 1619. 1619 also, the House of Burgesses will meet for the first time. 1620, some people arrive in Plymouth, not really a big deal. 1622, that was a joke. 1622, there's an uprising in Virginia by the Indians. So were the Indians happy to have all these Westerners coming over? These Europeans coming over? Yeah, Western is relative. So were the Indians happy to have the Europeans coming over?
No.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes they didn't really care too much. And other times they were like, you guys have to leave now. Okay? In 1624, England has its first royal colony. So it takes all the way from 1585 to 1624 for England to have its first royal colony. Which was the first Spanish royal colony? Stephen?
The first colony?
The very first colony. Okay, which was the first Dutch royal colony? But Dutch is a little bit different. But which was the first colony sponsored by the government in the New World? Stephen?
The first?
The very first one. The French government, when the French started sending people over, which group of people came over, which was the first group to come with permission by the French government? Stephen?
The first?
First one, yeah, there's a theme here. The very first English colonies were not sponsored or funded by the British government, by the English government. We're going to talk about why in a little bit, but do you think that sped things up or slowed it down?
Sped.
It slowed it down. When people have to risk their own money, they tend not to take risks. But when people are using other people's money, when someone is using other people's money, they tend to be a little bit more risky. So should you give people all your money and say, do whatever you want with it? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Bad idea, right? This is also a lesson about what happens when governments fund things today. Right? There was a big solar power plant out in the western part of the United States. The government funded it, and it did a horrible job, and it went bankrupt. How come?
Because the government was funding it.
Because the government was funding it. If the company goes bankrupt, who cares? We don't lose any money, right? That's very oversimplified with what happened, an oversimplification. But that's kind of the basic idea. When the government funds things, people will go take risks. But when I have to use my own money, people are a lot more cautious. So just be aware that that's how things have always worked. So the British people, having to use their own finances, are a little cautious at first. But as soon as the British government starts funding things, well now, the floodgates open. Okay, so the 1630s, after the British government starts founding colonies, and the 1630s begins what is called the Great Migration of the English. And there is going to be a lot of people who come over. 1630, the Massachusetts Bay Colony will be founded. In 1632, Maryland will be founded. In 1636, Roger Williams will be kicked out of Massachusetts and banished to Rhode Island. Yes?
How do you spell Massachusetts?
M-A-S-S. Mass. Just put mass. M-A-S-S dot. Don't make me spell things when we're being recorded. Why is England slow? Okay, so we've talked a little bit about it. Now let's move into some more specific things. In 1485, John Calvert technically founded the first English colony. over in Newfoundland, right? He came over. What was he doing there? You guys remember? John Calvert?
John Calvin.
He's a Genoan who came over from England. What was he doing? Stephen?
Fishing.
Fishing. Yeah, he was gathering fish, taking it back, everybody's eating it. Fish and chips, hoorah. So, how come they don't have English colonies from 1485 all the way down? Well, that's a really good question. When the Spanish started colonizing the New World, did they start in 1493 and then just stop? And then start 100 years later? That's pretty much what happened here. 1485, John Calvert in Newfoundland, and it's not until 1585 that you get Roanoke. That's 100 years. Did France come over and say, man, this looks like we can make a lot of money. Let's come back in 100 years?
No.
The Dutch, did they come and say, oh, look, New York. Well, we'll call it New Amsterdam temporarily, but we'll come back in 100 years and do that. Well,
Yeah.
why did the English? It doesn't make sense, right? There's this opportunity over in this new place, and so there has to be a reason why England is so slow to get over here. Now, they're last to come, but they wind up kind of dominating the colonial scene, and we'll talk about why that happens as we get into the formation of the colonies and the foundation of the United States as an infant nation amongst giants. So in 1485, John Calvert really kind of founded the first colony, although it's not a permanent colony. But what's going on in England? Well, there's a lot of discontinuity. There's a lot of disunity in England. In other words, England has problems in its own backyard. It doesn't have time to worry about go playing in the neighbors. Right? There is a lot of trouble in England. So England has to worry about keeping England in one piece. It can't worry about going and starting new colonies all over the face of the earth yet. It will do that later. But right now, England is in danger of being torn apart. And if your house is about to fall down, are you going to go try and work on somebody else's house? No, you're going to stay home and fix yours. Or you have to fix your house. So that's what's going on here. There's three major areas of disunity in England. She has a dry erase marker. I don't know how she got it. There is three major areas of disunity in England: religious, political, and social. Religious disunity, political disunity, social disunity. That's horrible. Right? When you have these three things, your country is not going to be able to do very much. And when we talk about disunity, we're not talking about, oh, these people disagreed with these people and they had lots of debates. No, we're talking about these people killed these people because they had different ideas. So there are people killing each other in England because of religion, because of politics, and because of social standing. This is not good when you have these things happening. She has another dry erase marker. She has dry erase markers.
She's getting them off of my desk. She's getting them off my desk.
I'm teaching. Sit down, Zane.
She's getting them off my desk.
So the religious problem, what is the major thing that's going on in the early 1500s with religion? What's happening?
Lily's going and getting
Nope.
the erase markers.
Nope. 1517, October 31st. What happens? It's the 500th anniversary this year. 1517, October 31st, in Germany.
Columbus sailed there. No.
Absolutely not.
Oh wait, no. Columbus
Ania?
Day was yesterday. What's his name? John Calvin.
No. John Calvin was 6 years old.
Oh
Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Remember the 95
Martin
or
Luther.
Martin Luther delivered his 95 Theses to the bishop in Mainz and began
What day is that going to be?
the October 31st.
Oh.
Started what eventually would become what we call now the Protestant Reformation.
So
It's called Protestant because Martin Luther protested certain activities of the Catholic Church. It's called Reformation because Martin Luther wanted to reform or fix the church. Okay? Yes, Stephen?
why did he do that on Halloween?
Halloween was not
All
an idea.
Hallows Eve.
It wasn't an idea. He wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do it on Halloween because that'd be cool. No, he just did it because he was tired of seeing these things and he sent it. The date has little significance. He didn't plan it for a specific date.
Is that Henry VIII?
Do not ask me about what we are not talking about. Okay? So, there's disunity in England, and actually that's the next thing. So part of the problem is as this idea of religious reformation spreads, it's not long after Martin Luther publishes those 95 Theses that he'll be excommunicated by the Pope. He kind of unintentionally starts a new division, a new schism, a new part of Christianity. He's kind of forced into that when the Catholic Church says you can no longer be Catholic. And he's like, well, I'm still going to worship God. And they say, fine, but you have to play with your toys over there. They kind of created two groups, whether he wanted to or not. Well, it's not long after that there are several different groups. And Henry VIII, over in England, yeah, that's Henry VIII. You can just write Henry VIII, although with names you get Roman numerals. Henry VIII wants to get a divorce. Again, this is a gross oversimplification, but it works for our purposes. Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce. The religious leaders of the Catholic Church said, no, you can't do that. And Henry VIII said, fine, I'll start my own religion and give myself a divorce. So Henry VIII starts what will become the Anglican Church. Anglican meaning from England, right? English church. That's what Anglican means. He begins the Anglican Church because he basically wants to get a divorce, and the Catholic Church wouldn't let him do it. And that begins with great fervor the Reformation in England. And so now when Henry VIII does that, people will start killing each other over whether or not they're Protestant, whether they're Anglican or Catholic. And they will be doing that for about 100 years. Okay, so there's going to be lots of bloodshed over religion in England. There's going to be lots of bloodshed over religion in Europe. Some of the bloodiest conflicts in Europe are over religion. Does that make religion bad?
No.
No, it makes people stupid, is what it does. If I disagree with you, and the only way I feel like I can beat you is by killing you, do I have good arguments?
No.
No. Because people have killed each other over lots of different things. People have had different political ideas, and so they just killed each other. People have had different ideas about how to farm. Did you know that there were actually conflicts over farming? And so, does that make farming bad? No. Does it make politics bad? Does it make government bad because people have fought over government? No. It makes people stupid, is what it does. And throughout history, people have thought that it was easy just to kill their opponents than to sit down and argue with them and discuss things with them and reason with them. And so, Henry VIII is going to start this. He's going to have several kids. The kids aren't going to get along. One of them is going to try and bring Catholicism back. Then Elizabeth is finally going to become queen. And Elizabeth is going to have executed over 100 Catholic priests. So she's going to go through, she's not a nice lady. She's going to go through and she is going to execute Catholic priests. And she is going to strictly demand that people conform to what she wants, how she wants England to be. She's a very strong, very emotional leader. And she's one of those people who one day she likes you and the next day you're dead. She is one of those types of people. But what's going to happen is there's a lot of religious turmoil, and it's not really until Elizabeth that it kind of settles down and people realize, all right, I guess we're going to be mostly Anglican now. So that will kind of start to settle down, except not all of the Protestants agree with what the Anglican Church should be doing. So there's going to be little groups, little splits off, little divisions, even amongst the Anglicans. There are going to be some people who think that we have to actually try and do what the Bible says, and we have to try and be holy, and we have to try and follow what God would have us to be, and those people are going to be called Puritans. And there are going to be other people who argue, a lot of the arguments, again, very simplified, a lot of the arguments come down to which books we're going to use, which books of prayer we're going to use, whether or not religious services are going to happen similar to the Catholic Church or very different from the Catholic Church. And again, people are going to be killed over these ideas. John Bunyan wrote, if I remember correctly, he wrote The Pilgrim's Progress from prison. Right? John Bunyan spent a large chunk of his life in prison because he was a Puritan. Just because he had different ideas on how things should be done. Well, we'll see in a little bit why leaders are so scared of ideas, because ideas can be dangerous. So there's also political unrest. there is this little island over to the left of England on the map called Ireland. And the English had been trying to take over Ireland for a very long time. And it was taking lots of their military power, it was taking lots of their money, and it was taking lots of their time. Well, if they're using their military power, their money, and their time trying to conquer Ireland, what are they not going to be able to do? They're not going to be able to go to the New World and use their time, their military, and their money. Because they're busy trying to take over Ireland. And I don't know, for some reason the English have always wanted Ireland. I think it was the potatoes. And so what happens, potatoes actually are native to the New World. So what happens, yes?
Didn't the,
Is it related to what we're doing?
yes.
Okay.
Don't the English and Irish finally, aren't they all part of the United Kingdom?
Yes.
So they finally settled down, they're not killing each other anymore?
No.
So
They still kill each other, even today. Yeah. Yeah, this is a conflict that has been going on for a very long time. It will probably continue into the foreseeable future. So there's political unrest. What do we do with these Irish people? And the Irish are thinking, what do we do with these English people? They're always over here at our potato fields. And then Spain, the king of Spain wants to marry Elizabeth. Because then he gets to be king of what?
both.
Spain and England. Right? And then he can use the English military to quit killing Irish people and go fight everybody on the continent. And he can enlarge his kingdom. And so because Spain, remember right now, Spain is the world power. They're the richest, most powerful country in the world. And for some reason, the king of Spain wants to become richer and powerfuler. Even though powerfuler is not a word. So he has eyes for Elizabeth, and he says, "Oh dear, please marry me." And she says, "No, you're a toad." And so he does what anybody does when a woman calls him a toad. He gets a huge armada of ships and goes and tries to attack England. Well, if you are being invaded by the most powerful country in the world, do you have time to go start colonies in the New World? No, you don't. Well, it turns out that there's actually a lot of things going on that will eventually cause the Spanish Armada to come, like England financing pirates, attacking Spanish galleons, bringing money back from the New World, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. But eventually, Spain gets tired of it, and the king gets tired of being called a toad, and he gets the Spanish Armada together. And in 1588, they sail to go attack England, and for lots of different reasons, the English wind up winning. One reason was bad weather, one reason was bad navigation on part of the Spanish, and another reason was that the English had developed some copper-bottom boats which didn't get barnacles and moss on them like the Spanish vessels did. And so the English vessels, even though they were much smaller, were much more maneuverable. And so they were able to outmaneuver and outfight the Spanish fleet. But all of those things together, plus some other reasons, are why in 1588 the English will defeat the Spanish Armada, will send shockwaves around the world that a country was able to defeat the mighty Spanish Navy. And so the political situation is starting to calm down. England's kind of said to the rest of the world, "Don't mess with us, we'll punch you in the face." And so the rest of the world is kind of like, well, maybe we'll leave England alone. They get the Irish situation settled down, and so now they're kind of taking care of the religious turmoil, the political turmoil is kind of working, but now the social turmoil, what's going on with that? Stephen?
I have a question about Spain and England.
What?
Do you think that England finally defeating the most powerful navy in the world kind of inspired the colonies later to rebel?
No. No, completely different reasons. It was never mentioned.
Someone's knocking.
Well, I'm teaching. I can't do the door. So, the social problems. You have people in England who own all the land. They're called nobles. You have people in England who own all the wealth. They're called nobles. You have people who are starving to death. You have people who want to own something because they're working their entire life and then they have nothing to show for it. And so on top of that, not only do you have all these people who own everything, the nobles, and these wealthy people get to make all the decisions, so you own nothing in life, you have no say in what happens in your life, and you're pretty much told what you can do and when you can do it. That's not a lot of fun. And on top of that, you have a growing population. From 1550 to 1600, the population in England grows by over 1 million people. Which today we think, oh, that's not that much. But back then, that's a whole lot. Right? So over 1 million people. And it's continuing to grow exponentially. And so the English are now having to figure out how to feed everybody. They're having to figure out how to find jobs for everybody. And in fact, under Henry VIII, it would be illegal to not have a job. If you were a healthy man and you didn't have a job, you would go to jail. If you were a healthy man, not only was it illegal not to have a job, it was illegal to try and change jobs. So if you were a healthy man and you started working at a blacksmith shop and you said, well, you know, this whole smithing thing, not really for me. I'm going to go be a plumber. There weren't plumbers. But I'm going to go be a plumber. You would get arrested for trying to change jobs. So you could never try and do something better. If your father was a farmer, you were going to be a farmer, and there were no questions about it. If your farmer was a bowyer, then you were going to be a bowyer, and there's no questions about it. If your father, they make bows and arrows. If your father was a cooper, actually they make bows. Fletchers make arrows. If your father was a cooper, then you were going to be a cooper, and there's no questions about it. You don't get to change. Because there were too many people. And they were having problems with unemployment. They were having problems with people starving. And so they started throwing people into debtors' prisons. And they started asking this question, what do we do with the surplus population? And so there will be all of these problems. And it's not until they figure out how to deal with the religious, political, and social problems that England begins to think really seriously about colonies over in the New World. So let's talk about some of the early failures, and then we'll get into what is going to drive people over from England. Stephen.
So even though the English were constantly killing each other, almost everything, they still intimidated people?
Yes. What tends to happen in areas where you have excessive population, and again, excessive population is relative, because if you went to England and told them that their colonies one day were going to have 340 million people in it, they would not believe you.
340 million?
In the United States, yeah, together, about 340 million people. Back then, population density was a lot smaller because farming has advanced so much. We're able to feed so many more people now, and communication and travel and all sorts of things have improved, so we can have much larger populations. But back then, in 1550 to 1600, the population of England went from 3 million to 4 million, and that was, what are we going to do with all these people? Right? So we're 100 times larger than England in the end of the 16th century. And so it's population explosion. It's a very relative term. So these early failures, one of the reasons why they failure is because there's no support from the crown. Again, it's not necessarily that people weren't smart enough to do it. It's not that they didn't want to do it. It's that there were very few people who were, first of all, wealthy enough to take the risk. And remember, unlike the Dutch, the English didn't have joint stock companies yet. Not really. And so if you were going to send people over to the New World, you footed the bill, and you took all the risk. What if you sent 100 people over, and the ships sunk on the way? Now you're just broke. Do you think many people wanted to take that risk? No. Not many people wanted to take that risk. Because England has a very rigid social structure, right? It's against the law to change jobs. So if you had some extra money and you invested it and then you lost it all, you're stuck wherever you are. There's no upward mobility. There's no prospect of becoming getting a better position in society. You're just stuck wherever you happen to be. So there's no support. So not many people want to come over. And it's not, again, we started talking about how these things started to settle down. That's when we're going to see people start to come over. The Humphrey Gilbert is going to come over and try and found a colony in Newfoundland. And he is going to be one of the people who suppressed the Irish. A very brutal man. He killed women and children. He burned villages down. He did whatever he thought was necessary in order to defeat the Irish. Not exactly the kind of person that you would want to go exploring with. And so this colony in Newfoundland is going to fail probably, again, oversimplifying things, but probably mostly because Humphrey Gilbert is not exactly a good leader.
He's not a nice
Walter Raleigh is going to lead the next colony over into the New World from England at Roanoke. He was a military leader. He sends 100 colonists over. They're mostly his personal servants. Many of them are his personal servants. And he comes over, and after a little while, the people who come are tired and they want to go home. Well, 100 more people are going to come. He's going to send them over, and they will become the lost colony of Roanoke. Right? You hear that story about how 100 people were left, and then a year later, everybody comes back, and all they find is this one word, Croatoan, carved onto a tree, and nobody knows what happened to these people. And that's Walter Raleigh. So Walter Raleigh takes a risk. He sends 200 people over. The first 100 people get tired and want to come home. The second 100 people, who knows where they are? So by this time, Walter Raleigh has funded 2 voyages to the New World, and has he gotten profit from it? No. He's broke now, because he had to take all the risk. He is the one who lost all of his servants. He is the one who lost all of the money that he spent on sending people over, on supplies, on ships, on all of those things. All that money's gone. He never gets it back. He's not going to get it back, because it wasn't backed by the crown. So the problem is, England isn't supporting these people, and because they don't have extra money from the crown, the expeditions are fairly small. How many soldiers did Spain send for their first permanent colony? Who remembers? Stephen?
1,000.
Yeah, 1,000 soldiers. And then not long after that, they tried another colony with 2,500 soldiers. The English send over 100 people total. That's not big enough. It's too small. Because what happens if you've only got 100 people and then, I don't know, the flu hits? Or, so the stomach bug hits for a week. Now your whole colony can be out of commission for a whole week because there's just not a lot of people. So you need kind of a bigger chunk of people to go to establish permanent settlements, but nobody has the money individually to do that. So eventually the crown will get involved, and one of the primary reasons why the crown gets involved is because they realize this is the answer to the surplus population. We can stop throwing people in jail. We can just send them to the New World. The English like to export people. What do the English do with their criminals?
Australia.
They send them to Australia, right? The English like to export people. The answer to English population problems are send them somewhere else. So the English are going to start sending their surplus population over to the New World. Well, there's a reason why people are going to be willing to go. Because you could die. There's a reason why people are going to be able to go. And this, again, is why ideas are dangerous. In 1516, there's a man by the name of Thomas More. He published a book called Utopia. And in this book, there was this idea of masterless men. Right? Or an idea of masterless men comes from it. And people are going to envision this new world as this utopia, a place where they can get away and they can escape from the strictures and social structures of the old world. And so people are going to be willing to come over and risking their life in the new world because it gives them a chance for freedom. It gives them a chance to get things that they could never get in the old world. In 1607, John Smith, does everybody remember him? What is John Smith famous for?
Dying?
No.
Oh, he's not the one frozen in the Arctic?
No.
No, okay.
That's right.
Disney made a movie about it.
They made a lot of...
Oh yeah, he tries to get gold.
John Smith is famous for the story of Pocahontas, right? Most people, when they hear John Smith, they think Pocahontas also. So in 1607, John Smith comes over, and in writing, not long after he got over to the New World, he says, here every man can be his own master and owner of his own land and labor. So that's kind of the idea, is you come over here, and you are now your own master. You don't answer to somebody like you did over in England. No person here is your king. No person here tells you you can't do that job. No person here throws you in jail for trying to learn new things and to become better. In fact, over here, if you are willing to work hard and learn, that's good. And so this is very attractive for people who want to work hard. In 1623, again, to try and solve the surplus population problem, the English crown wants people to leave. Please go. And so the English crown starts publishing letters and tracts and posters to get people interested in coming over to the New World. One of these posters in 1623 says anybody who goes to the New World could be lord of 200 acres of land. And today we think, oh, 200 acres, that's a lot, but not a whole lot. What is an acre? Stephen?
As much ground back then as a team of oxen with a man driving them could cover in a whole day.
As much ground as a team of oxen could plow in a day. Are you ever going to plow for 200 days? No, because then you would never be planting. So is there any way that one family would use 200 acres? No. So now what did you have?
Extra land.
And 200 acres. You had an estate. You had land to play on. You didn't just have land. First of all, most people over in England didn't actually own the land they lived on and farmed. But now not only can you own land, but you can own more land than you could ever use. And not only could you own the land, but you got to decide what you planted. You got to decide when you planted. You got to decide, who you let work on it. You got to decide what happens to the food after you harvested it. All of these decisions now get to be yours. You are your own lord. You are your own master of your own land and your own labor. And the idea that you could come and live somewhere and not have somebody lord themselves over you was very, very attractive. So people come over from England for freedom. Now, we're going to talk next time about exactly what that freedom means. But these problems in England, the religious problems, the political problems, the social problems, the answers to these things was to force people to do what we want. So why do you think the colonists started coming over from England? For religious freedom, for political freedom, for social freedom. Because everywhere the crown put pressure, it caused people to be upset. And so when England said, why don't you go over to this new place and you can make all your own decisions? Well, the people who were upset about England's religious laws, well, they came for religious freedom. The people who were upset about England's political laws, well, they came for political freedom. The people who were upset about the social status and the social structures in England, well, they came for social freedom. And so all of the problems in England are the very same reasons why the English colonists will come over in such large numbers. So people come over from England in search of freedom. But again, freedom doesn't mean the same thing to everybody at the same time. And so next time we'll talk about really what do we mean when we say religious freedom? What do we mean when we say political freedom or social freedom? But the idea is that over in the New World, no one is surplus population. You come over here, your own lord, your own master. You get to make your own decisions. You get to have religious, political, and social freedom. And that was very attractive. All right, that's it for today. Make sure you get all the notes down off the board.
Can you leave the board up for a few minutes?
Yep.
All of them.